My experience was about when I was working in an international NGO, and I'd just come from a small, kind of community-based, community organization, Kenyan organization, and I went to this huge international, organization, and it's when I experienced. That was my first, I think, experience of what really international aid looks like, because we were handling huge sums of money. So where does the money go to? Oh, we need to have a multi-country workshop. Oh, we need to get a global lead. We need to get, and then I'm like, okay, why are we having? So I started asking myself. Then I started saying, okay, no, but maybe we need to give some money to the local organization. I mean, when I drilled down where the money was going to, like 60% of the money was staying within the organization. I remember being in a meeting and actually saying, you know what, if we are private sector, let's say we are private sector. Let's not pretend that we are what we are not. If we're here to help people, if we're here to alleviate poverty, blah, 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 let's do that. But if we are in the business of doing aid business, let's just say that's what we're doing. And then I don't have to worry that I'm lying to people that, I'm in the development sector. And actually what I'm doing is I'm funding a business model. And that for me was just, it broke my heart. I'll give GK just an opportunity, and then we'll talk about how we can change the narrative and how international aid can actually change and look different, and then we can close that out.
The worst example was, I was raised by parents who were civil servants. My dad was a business. I think he had a mind of business. So he had a shop, and he was farming. So the produce, the potatoes, the milk from the cows, the beans, and the maize, he would supply to the local high school, because they're boarding schools. And life was good. And I vividly remember it's not my dad, our lives changed after the introduction of SAPs, the structural adjustment programs, completely. So the schools don't have money either to buy or to pay. So and obviously the enterprise for farming completely went down. So I'm in a family where my older siblings had it all. They had a good life, So for me, that's actually it's my worst example of what international aid can do. And why I was bringing that bit for the concessional loans or the aid that is very service, provision and all that, is to sort of see where things go wrong. So the side for service provision, whether it is the boreholes and all those things, where it goes wrong is the perspective of sustainability in terms of not responding to the needs of the community. And the second bit is it's not embedded within the community structure.
How can aid then, how can it change so that it responds to the needs of Kenyan people?
So let me try to be a bit comprehensive. So when you think about the structure of the economy, so you have agriculture is still in Kenya, it's still big. You got 80% who still depend on agriculture, but you got other, whether it is the service industry, the manufacturing, they are growing, but it's a bit slow. So when you think about that, the same thing I said about you can't separate the political economy and economic development. So you have to sort of enter into that space from that worldview. So what is the structure of the economy? So in terms of then international aid, what should be the approach? So when you think of that, then you'll be thinking about, so what's the trajectory of growth of this particular country? So for Kenya, what's the trajectory of growth? And you've got to bring in the perspective of economic transformation. Because whether it is the donors, whether it's the private sector or the government, these need to work together. Even the community and ourselves, these all actors need to work together for the realization of the economic transformation. So think of how then the donors get into the space of how do they work. to bring about private sector development. What needs to be done in that perspective? Is it, programs on business and environment reform, all those things, property rights? Remember, you may want to view it from democratic governance perspective, but there are probably things we've done about accountability, but you need to flip that and see how do you work in governance, but you're sorting out things to do with business environment reforms, all those things. So think about the thing of you got to think about the dynamic of the demography in Kenya. So what do you do as donor, negotiating and obviously designing with the country, that you have the bulk of the youth who don't have jobs, yet you have a spirit of entrepreneurship where there needs to be done. You got to think about, the ICT revolution. So what needs to be done in that space so that, as I'm saying, you're comprehensively, or rather you're looking at the economy, from a comprehensive perspective. So I think in terms of the biggies, in terms of just in this space, obviously there's an issue of, design, but a design for me that is very, you need to integrate sectors. Those things of, you're doing an agric, program. Agriculture is important to us, but you got a whole value chain. You got agriculture, you got logistics, you got, export. At the same time, you got to think about, the business, environment, and then that in itself, you have to have a perspective. How do you attract investment? So when you think of, Kenya, we have the devolved system of government. It's a big deal, or rather, it's a big driver of the economy. You got the likes of us, probably, who could only get jobs in Nairobi, but now you're going into the other, into the subnational level. So you got also to start thinking, even in this space, international aid, where does it go to so that it makes sense? Obviously for purposes of political development, but also for purposes of economic development. So I think for me, the view needs to change, be that comprehensive, and then, in terms of then design, issues of sustainability, issues of the big things that are happening, from ICT to the youth bulge to innovation. I mean, sometimes I think we limit innovation to the IT perspective. There is also innovation within technology that is outside information technology. So I can stop there.
I think GK has covered it really well. All I'd say is that we also need to recognize that there's a definite need for a major mind shift, in all that's happening. I mean, we are in times of climate change. These are realities that are confronting us now, and maybe in the process of trying to achieve that mind shift change, we should be thinking about, what we're going to do about like the condescending attitude that the aid givers has had all this time, and how do we make sure that happens to the extent where we realize that we're all in this together. If we want it or not, we're all going to perish. So where do we go from now?
Yeah, thank you so much, and very interesting discussion. I had a question. We talked about, I think, the different things, what international development organizations do well and maybe do less well. I was wondering, is there one international development organization that you think has a particularly good model that works really well, and that you would hope that maybe other organizations would also do more? So maybe.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your session. So I guess you spoke today about AIDS, and I guess that comes in a number of avenues, right? So you have your NGOs, you have your other kind of government, international government coming in here. But also thinking more broadly, you have foreign investment from other companies, VCs, investors as well. And I guess it would be good to get your thoughts on what are the pros and cons of the investment coming in. For example, potentially defaulting on some loans, countries taking ownership and what that means in the long term. But also if there's other alternatives or controls you can implement to make it a much more sustainable use of funds to help Kenya grow.
So my question to you is, do you think aid should be dropped? And Kenyans should say, listen, we're going to build our economy, take the short-term pain for the long-term gain. That's my question.
So do you think that there's more that can be done for intergovernmental organizations to be as accountable as organizations in the private sector?
Do
So my question is around probably just the systems and the processes. So most of us work with large, medium-sized companies, and a lot of them, I know we've talked about public funds, but I'm sure there's a lot of aid that comes from businesses, like a lot of CSR angles. A lot of the time, you end up giving to the exact same organizations time after time. So you have a specific group of organizations that are almost overrepresented in big companies. They receive a lot of funding. And then you have a chunk that no one knows about but need a lot of aid. What kind of processes do you manage to go beyond that or to overcome that? Because in my experience, you normally have a few people who are, if you Google, you find like a minister or someone's name that comes up. When you reach out to the person, it's the same companies, and you don't know which local person to reach out to for the actual authentic ones.
Or should we continue with aid or not?
I think aid makes a big difference in some situations where you're dealing with vulnerabilities, with major vulnerabilities. And I think that if it is understood, this is why I talked about the importance of a mind shift. Because if it is administered well, if it is thought through carefully, it can make a huge difference. And I think that there is a strong case for aid.
For the pros and cons, I think we must appreciate and understand this system is here for a long time. It's got part of it is business. Anytime I get an opportunity to work with the World Bank program, I tell fellow Kenyans, this is part of our money. It's not World Bank money. So that whole thing of, countries, make subscriptions, and then that money then goes to Ghana or goes to, that won't change. But I think for me, is two things. One is countries where, things physically are really, really bad, they don't have much choice. So we have to take, the IMF facilities, your situation in England as we speak. But for poorer countries, it's bad. And, they introduce some concessions that they destroy the fundamentals of the economy. So I think, so what are the alternatives? Some of the alternatives tend to be expensive. So for example, if you go to the commercial market, you've got loans that are very quick to procure, but they have zero accountability, so the citizens don't benefit. So it's a catch-22. So, but I think for sustainability, for programs where the design includes the needs of the people or the real needs, you increase chances of sustainability. In terms of over-representation and ensuring that the beneficiaries are part of whether it's a decision or they get to know how money is being spent, I guess, my sister, it's a big conversation about the models, the big multilateral use, the contractor thing, when you think of, if you did an analysis of the portfolio probably of Tetra Tech being one of the USAID contractors, it will shock you the amount of money they have. He's sort of like agreeing with me. But there is no way that system will allow some woman in Turkana, who is a beneficiary, to be there. I think the shift then needs to be from the other side. The community is coming together, they've got assets, and they have a perspective of some empowerment of, if you're designing a program, which is to benefit us, we need to do it together. So, and I think the whole thing of whether it is those cooperative movements we're talking about is because we own this thing, the money is ours, we decide on the interest rate and that kind of a thing. It's a similar model. Can it work? Yes, it can, but it will need to begin with a lot of empowerment from people to have an understanding. These are our needs. This is the methodology that will work, and we will be in charge. But it's slow, but it can work. These things tend to take time. So thank you very much.